Right, in this tutorial we'll look at loading the image we created in Photoshop onto a polygon cube in Maya. So I've loaded up Maya, I've got my poly modeling shelf active here, and I'm going to click on the second icon along, which is a poly cube. If I press the F key, that will frame selection. It brings it up nice and big on the screen, like so. By default, this is showing up grey. It means it's just got the default shader assigned to it. That's why it gets this grey colour from. We have a look on the right-hand side of the screen at the attribute editor here. If this tab isn't visible, you need to turn this little icon on here. But if you've got these three tabs like mine, that's fine. Just click on attribute editor. And we'll see at the end here that we've got something called Lambert1. These are a load of attributes to do with this cube, this selected object. At the end here is the start of the shading network. And Lambert1 is the default shader that exists in Maya. You can't delete it, and any new object will always be assigned this shader. What we don't want to do is change it, because if we start mucking about with this, any new object you create will always have that, it will share that shader, because multiple objects can have the same material assigned to them. So we're going to assign a new material to this cube. So I'm going to do this way. I'm going to right click over it, hold it down, and go down to here, assign new material, and release. And it brings up this dialog window, and we're just going to assign, there's a few options here, there's more options if you go further down like so, but if I just go up to the Maya one, I'm just going to assign another Lambert. A Lambert is just a basic non-reflective material. So click on that, and we can now see we've got Lambert 2. Okay, if you click off the cube, click back on it again, you'll see now that Lambert 1's disappeared. It still exists within Maya, but it's just not assigned to anything. But what is assigned to this cube is Lambert 2. We can click on the color swatch, make it a different color if we want to. We can muck about with the color wheel like so. Okay, you'll notice there's lots of different shader channels here, so we can muck about with different attributes, so we can muck about with its transparency and so on. We'll leave them all by default for now, so if you do muck about, just undo them. Along here, these are important. These are input icons, so it just means that we can map different things to these channels, and this is how we kind of work mostly. We map different things to adjust these channels rather than these just controls here. We get more control by using external kind of image files, as it were. So we're just going to play about with the color channel here. So we're going to click on this, and we're going to map our image to that color channel. This brings up the create render node with lots and lots of options, but the only one you're going to worry about for the majority of your studies is the fourth one down, file. Okay, so just click on file, and that will just create this new node which we can load our texture into. Okay, now sometimes you'll get a bit lost with this going in and out of shader network, so let me just try and explain. If I click off this, look, this vanishes. When nothing's selected, nothing will appear in the attribute editor. To find that file node again, look, we click on our cube. Here's where we are again. We've got, polycube, shape, polycube 1, Lambert 2 here. Okay, Lambert 2 is the start of our shading network, and look, you can see it's got a little black input arrow, and that will take us to our file node. So once again, look, click on that, see where the little input arrow is, click on that, and it takes us to that file node. I'll click on this folder. This loads up an open window, and I've moved my my Photoshop files into this source images folder, and I did a set project, so by default Maya's instantly looking in this Maya MG source images folder. Okay, so if you always do a set project first, Maya will be looking kind of in the right place as long as you've got the files in there. I want to load the JPEG, so look, I just single click or double click on it if you want to load it instantaneously, but this will give me a preview, and then I can open it like so. So that's loaded into this node. It's not displaying here yet because we're just in 5 mode, which is just materials. We want to press 6 to get materials and textures, and then you can see that the texture shows up and it maps fairly cleanly because we laid out the image kind of correctly. Okay, I'll show you a few more things. It's now done, but I'll show you a few more things to do with shaders. The first thing I'll show you is the hypershade. The hypershade is where all your materials and shaders live in Maya. So look, this icon here, if I click on this, give it a moment to load, and this is all the shaders and so on that exist within Maya. Okay, so up here we've got Lambert 1, which isn't currently not assigned to anything. We've got our new Lambert 2, and then there's a couple of other default shaders here, a particle cloud and a shader glow, and again you can't delete those. I can delete this one. If I deleted this one, it would actually flag my object bright green to mean it's got nothing assigned to it. Okay, it's got some other stuff here which I don't think you really need. It ends up cluttering the window. If you're working on twin monitors, then it's fine, but I get rid of all this stuff. You don't have to do this, but I like it like this. Like this stuff here is replicated here. Okay, so you don't really need all of this stuff. So I get rid of this like so. So I've just got the browser window and then my workspace. Okay, and if you want to have a look at what a shader network looks like, if I middle drag this, so press the mouse wheel and drag it down to here, there's my Lambert 2, and if I click on this, this will show me the input and output arrows, okay, the connections to this. And so look, here is our image file, and if we've got the attribute editor open over here, we click on these, the attributes will appear in here. So this is another way of viewing all those tabs. Okay, look, you can view them by looking at the tabs here or clicking on these arrows, but it's taking me in and out of them just like this is. Okay, and you can actually connect these things by dragging them and right clicking and deleting them. Break connection like this, you can break that connection, then you can redrag it and so on. So you can work in the shader network like this, but I'm showing you it through the attribute editor. So there's different ways of doing things. This area here, if you delete stuff out from it, it will delete the material. To clear the work area, let's this little icon here. Okay, and likewise I can bring this into this area by having it highlighted here. If I then click on that, it also brings it into this area and shows the input and outputs. Okay, so that's just to make you aware of what's in the scene. You can also look, here's all the textures in my scene. You can drag and drop stuff from a Windows browser straight into this and it will load them all into the scene. They'll be unassigned to objects, but then you can assign them later on. And likewise, look, if I just pull this over to one side, you can assign materials and textures this way. Look, if I middle drag this onto my cube, it assigns the default material. If I middle drag this one back onto it, it assigns that one. If I have components selected, so if I select this object, I can actually assign separate materials to different components, well, in this case faces. So if I pick that face there and I middle drag that onto that face there, I've now assigned the default material to that polygon face there. So you can have multiple materials assigned to a single object. Whilst that's selected, I'll drag that one back onto it like so. Okay, so that is just a brief introduction to the hypershade. Okay, I'll close that one down. Now what I want to look at, I'll just go back into object mode. I want to look at the UV editor. So I'm going to go to workspace and I'm going to go UV editing here. Give it a moment to load up. And this shows you the UV coordinates on our cube, and they're kind of how the texture maps onto it. Couple of things to do with this. There's some icons to do with the display up here. Okay, so look, this turns on shading, this goes back to normal. This turns on to show how much distortion, I think, is on the image. If it's all white like this, it means there's very little distortion. If you started moving points about, you might get some different colors. Okay, so I'll go back just to this shaded view here. I'll turn off that distortion. And this one turns on, it flags up edges of UVs and stuff like that. But if we leave it like this one just highlights, puts a thick line around texture borders. This turns the grid on, off, and so on and so forth. And this one does a UV snapshot, which takes a picture of this or creates an image from this that you can load into Photoshop to help template and to use as a template. This turns the image on and off. This turns on a checker grid. This just helps when you're laying out UVs just to make sure it's not too distorted. This one's good. This is a dimmer switch. So you turn that on, you can dim the image to help you just see the UV layout. Okay, so I'm going to leave it like this at the moment. The same keys work in this view. So the Alt key, it's a 2D view, so you can't orbit it, but you can zoom and drag with the mouse wheel. Okay, and UV is a component. So if I right click and go UV, I can pick a UV point like this. I can press W and I can move it about, and you can see how it affects the mapping. Okay, it distorts it. This is how it kind of works. Okay, now the default mapping is working fine in this. If yours isn't mapped completely cleanly, you can pick all the UVs like this. You can press R and you might scale it to try and get it to fit better, or you can adjust it all types of way like that. You might want to move it, you can rotate it like that, and again you can see how it's affecting the mapping over here. You've got some tools over here. You've got the UV toolkit over here that allows you to do even more things. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I will just show you the cut and sew. So over here, if I wanted to separate some of these UVs at the moment, if I pick, say, this face here, and I try and move it away, it obviously pulls the rest of the UVs, so we get distortion. But if I wanted this, if I wanted his face to be on every single face, I could do this. I could go into edge mode, I could cut that edge like this, and then I can select these UVs. I can actually select it as a UV shell. The UV shell is just joined together UVs. And look, now I've got this. And I can move this over here, and I've got his face on that side. Okay, and I can do the same here. So I can pick this edge here, I can cut that UV shell, pick that UV shell, and I'll move that over there. You've got his face on that side. It's quite scary, really. And so you can separate these UVs. I've got them all on top of each other at the moment, so breaking them up. And you can see this is a UV shell like this, okay, because they're all connected together. If I broke these up, they become separate UV shells. So that's just a very, very brief introduction to the UV texture editor. And it just shows you there's lots of tools here on how to sort of unfold UVs and lay them out and so on. Okay, so hopefully that will help you get your image projected onto your polygon cube.